Science fiction and faith, the two parallels that don't come together very often, but when they do, it can be a pretty cool thing. And today we're going to be talking with Brock Heasley of a new sci-fi Christian film called The Shift and what he thinks about the whole merging of the two genres together. Hello, Devoted Geeks, and welcome to Geek Devotions, the show from Devoted Geeks, who are devoted to let you know you're loved. I'm Dallas. So glad you guys hit the play button. If you're new to our show, we take geek culture and let people know they're loved and they're cared for. So if you don't watch past this moment, know this: we love you, we care about you. There really is a plan and purpose for your life. Don't give up. And today, ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking to somebody I'm pretty excited about. This is a writer, a director, a comic book writer, and artist himself, Brock Heasley of The Shift. How are you doing today, sir?
I am doing very well, Dallas. How about yourself?
I am doing well. I'm excited to have you on the show today. We're diving into a conversation about a film coming out, I believe, like December 1st or 2nd.
December 1st.
Yep. December 1st. Awesome. Called The Shift, and starring like some pretty big name people. We got Neil McDonough, who did Captain America, Minority Report, Sean Astin from Lord of the Rings, and Christopher Pollock from Jurassic World Dominion. Some big names. But what is this? What is The Shift?
So The Shift is about a man who has an encounter with a mysterious stranger with otherworldly powers called the Benefactor. Mm-hmm. And he ends up, through this encounter, he ends up banished to a dark parallel world where he then fights to get back to the woman that he loves, back to his own reality.
Wow. Now, there's not a ton of sci-fi films out there. There's been a few that were kind of like, they're okay. There was one called like The Time Changer. I think came out like in early 2000s, and then you have some sci-fi books that were out there. You had C.S. Lewis. You had his space trilogy. But what inspired you to create faith-based sci-fi film?
Yeah, well, I've always been a lover of sci-fi and all things that this podcast is dedicated to, all things geek. That's part of my DNA,
right?
And I've always been a lover of movies, and so. But also my faith is really important to me. And usually when we think of sci-fi, outside of the examples that you just cited, and I think you just cited every single example of every sci-fi anything that crosses over into Christian theology. And that's sad. But I've always wondered, like, why is it all these great stories that I love, all this sci-fi that I love, Star Wars, Star Trek, Inception, Interstellar, like my favorite movie of all time is Gattaca.
Oh yeah.
Why do these things not acknowledge God that much? Why do they usually take place in a universe in which God does not exist, in which people don't really have that kind of a faith? And not to say that they all are that way. They're not all agnostic, but a lot of them are. The majority of them are. Usually there's an offense taken with sci-fi and religion collide. I think about Battlestar Galactica, a show that I really, I'm talking about the 2004 version.
Right.
And that ended on a really spiritual note. And the fans, half the fan base rioted, like they considered that one of the worst series finales of all time. And I totally disagree. I love the way the faith angle was intertwined with the science, and they finally came together and into this cohesive thematic whole that I thought was so enriching. And so outside of examples like that, I'm really starved for something that appeals to me on an entertainment level, the sci-fi that I love, but that also speaks to my faith and my spirituality. And so combining the two really just came from the idea of well, I'm going to tell stories. I'm going to tell stories that are important to me. I'm going to tell the stories that I want to see, that I'm not seeing. And that's really where The Shift came from. That's
awesome. And you're right, man. There have been glimmer of hopes we've seen throughout film and throughout cinema. I believe it was The Day the Earth Stood Still, the remake with Keanu Reeves. They kind of played a little bit of the illusion of Christ taking on a person's sins and stuff like that. But we never really seen it put forth in a good way, in a way that wasn't hokey, if you will.
Yeah,
especially from the Christian community, unfortunately. But it's some of it. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine and talking about how there's always this difficulty of combining faith with fiction because we don't want to blur the lines too much. I saw an interview. You were reading like mean tweets about the short, and one of it was people were talking about they're going on about some of the quote unquote theological implications of things that were clearly meant to be like it's just for story purposes. It's not the faith. How did you balance that out of faith and fiction coming together within the story?
Well, one of the things that's really powerful about science fiction is the way that it allows you to use things like metaphor and
Mhm.
analogy and allegory in order to get ideas across. When you think about Star Trek, for example, like Star
Mhm.
Trek's one of the big ones, right? There's a million Star Trek episodes, and it's
Oh
been
yeah.
around for years. And I mean, anybody who loves sci-fi, if you don't love Star Trek, I don't even know what you're doing. But Star Trek, one of the things that it does really well is that it tackles social issues, issues of the day, in a way that it brings everybody to the table. So if Star Trek is going to do an episode about racism,
Mhm.
it's not going to tackle that head on. It's going
Right.
to use green skinned aliens, versus purple aliens. That is not an actual Star Trek episode. I'm not an idiot. I'm just using a false example.
Exactly.
But so that's how Star Trek will approach things, and then conservatives and liberals and everybody gets to come to the table and enjoy that story because it puts them at enough of a distance from like whatever the current reality is, and
Mhm.
allows people to just focus on like, okay, what are the actual like issues, what are the principles that are involved here,
Yeah.
and then we can enjoy this story together and we can all learn together. And I
Right.
think that's the power of sci-fi.
Right.
And so taking that and saying, okay, well, we can do the same thing with faith. We can talk about uh, true principles and truths, but we can come at it through this fiction, and we can come at these things from a different angle that can enrich in a different way our understanding of these truths and these principles. And for some people, that's a huge leap to make. They're like, nope, things
Right.
have got to be exactly as it is in the Bible. It can't be any different from
Mm.
that. And I'm not trying to change the Bible.
Right.
The shift is inspired by the book of Job. If
Mm.
it's inspired by anything in the Bible, it's inspired by that. The
Right.
book of Job is not altered. Go check your Bible. It's there. It's fine. What I'm doing is I'm taking that story, I'm inspired by it, and I'm exploring its themes in a way that people are connecting with. I mean, hopefully, though, the movie
Right.
comes out in a few weeks, that they will connect with the idea and the stories of Job, the story of Job in a different way, the idea of suffering and where's God in suffering.
Right.
These are the things that I'm trying to wrestle with
Right.
within this genre, and I think that's fair to do. I think it's very fair to
Yeah.
do.
Absolutely. Well, you bring up the fact this based off of the story of Job. Let me ask you, why did you choose the story of Job as the backdrop of the story to it really, because really when you watch the film, it is the underbelly, it is the basis of the entirety of the film. What led to that decision?
So the biggest factor, I think, probably was more from my subconscious than necessarily from my conscious. But at the time that I wrote the script, I had been out of work for 4 years,
Oh wow.
and my family had basically been living on food stamps,
Mm.
and I had no real hope in sight of getting a regular job. It just was one of
Mhm.
those things that, like, no matter how many times I applied, I couldn't get it,
Yeah.
and I was feeling very led towards this filmmaking path, which is totally at odds with earning a wage,
Yeah.
and supporting my three daughters and my wife, um, and so I was passing through a Job period. I really
Mhm.
was. I was passing through a period of my life in which I didn't understand why things weren't working out. I didn't understand why they were getting worse.
Yeah.
I didn't understand what the point of that was. And so I wrote it into the story. This our protagonist, Kevin. Several years passed for him within this
Yeah.
story. He's really enduring a trial of some length, and in a trial in which he cannot see God. He cannot see him. He cannot see what his purpose is. He cannot see him in his life. And that's very much the place that I was in as I was writing it. And so I think Job, when I hit upon that idea of, I can be inspired by the book of Job. I mean, two things occurred to me. Number one, nobody's ever done that, that I can recall, because who thinks of Job and you're like, oh yeah, action movie.
Right.
That's what that is. So that was attractive to me. And then the second thing was just, yeah, I can identify with this. Like, this
Yeah.
makes sense to me.
I get that. And that's the thing about personal stories. When we tell stories, some of the best stories I've seen, they come from a personal place. There's a place of where
Hmm.
like where we're bringing it out and we're presenting it, and that's a hard shift to do to make that happen. You don't want to put too much out on plate for everybody, but at the same time, it's when the creators touches on something, it says something more for people.
Right.
So let me ask you this: this started off as it's funny when I first was contacted about you guys doing this, and I actually saw a screener of this film. I was having kind of deja vu. Like was I shifted? I feel like I've seen this. And I realized a couple years ago, I actually saw the short, The
Oh, did you
Shift.
really? Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
It's a buddy of mine. He said, hey, I think you might dig this. And so I actually saw the short, The Shift years ago. So I was watching the screen. I was like, what's happening here? Like I've seen this. And so it was clicking for me. I was prepping for the
Yeah.
show. What was it like making the quote unquote the shift from the short to the full film? Because I know you made some changes. Like for example, in the short,
Yeah.
the The villain flat out calls himself Satan, Lucifer, whereas
Right.
in this it's the benefactor. Why did you make some of those changes, and what was it like making that shift from a short to a full length film?
Well, in some ways it was really nice because I already had, a portion of the story told, and
Right.
it was really just about building something before and something after that. Because one of the things that people go really wrong with, in my opinion, when they translate a short film to a feature film, is that
Hmm.
they basically just tell that same story. They just stretch it over 2 hours.
Oh
And
yeah.
what I've done instead is I've told exactly the same story pretty much. It's in the short film, and then I've just put stuff on either side of it. So
Hmm.
the story's a lot bigger in scope,
Right.
and you've seen it, so you know that that's true. Which I think is going to make it a very fun experience for those like yourself who have seen the short film. Like
Yeah.
there's plenty more that's new.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but the challenge of that, of course, is that what works in a short film doesn't totally work in a feature film. You
Right.
can sit in a diner with two guys for 14 minutes in a short film, and you're fine with it. You sit in a diner for 14 minutes with two guys in a feature film. Well, you're going to try the audience's patience
Right.
with that. And
Yeah.
so there was this translation effort that had to happen where I was like, okay, I've got to lose some stuff here. I've got to take some ideas that are here. I got to explore them later on in the film, because I can't spend this much time there. And
Right.
then also just thinking about the audience. When I made that short film, there was exactly one person in the audience, and that was me. I
Right.
made that short film purely to see if I was capable of writing and directing something. That was the
Mm.
first narrative thing I'd ever created.
Oh
And
wow.
I just wanted to see if I could do it.
Hmm.
And I never thought that anybody would see it outside of the cast and crew. I
Hmm.
certainly never thought that millions of people would see it and then invest in a feature film version based on it. So it was never designed for all of that. And so in that
Right.
way, I think it probably is pretty pure,
Right.
a pretty pure expression, and that probably is why some people were drawn to. A lot of people were drawn to it. But taking it into a feature film, you're thinking about the name Satan. You're thinking about that as the name of a character,
Mm.
putting that in front of an actor that you're trying to recruit to play that guy,
Right.
and thinking, well, I may have just shot myself in the foot right there. Like, who
Right.
in the world is even going to get past page one when they find out that the character they're playing is Satan? Some
Right.
people are going to be excited about that. Maybe not the people I want to play the character, and also just thinking about the greater audience that it's going out to. It is a sci-fi film, and I think we get a little bit more sci-fi cachet by not calling him Satan, by just calling him the benefactor.
Hmm.
And also, I think it's also a nod to the fact that, yeah, you know what, we're playing around with the idea of a devil a little bit.
Hmm.
We're basing his power in technology and
Right.
not in magic or something supernatural or anything like that.
Right.
And so the benefactor is a way, calling him the benefactor is a way for me to say to the audience is, hey, this is not what you're familiar with.
Right.
This is not a new theology that I'm
Right.
proposing. This is a story. And in this story, this guy is called this name, and he uses a thing on his wrist, and it's different. And
Right.
so I think these are the signals that you have to build into something like this. When we're crossing sci-fi and faith, we have to be very careful that we're not presenting something that we're trying to pass off as, oh, this is how it really is.
Hmm.
And so there are all these signifiers in the film, like the name of the benefactor, that says to the audience, hey, this isn't a new religion, this isn't a new
Right.
theology. We're just using the genre to get at some truth. That's
Yeah.
it.
That's so good. And I think that does help changing some of those things up, laying those things out. Like, this is a fictional story. We're allegorizing what's taking
Mhm.
place. I think that helps a lot of things. I know that one of the issues that productions like The Chosen have run into is like, this is the story of Jesus is a real thing. This took place, but they've added things in there to flesh out the story. And
Mhm.
I think some people, when they go, well, this is Jesus. Well, Jesus didn't say that. That's in the Bible. They have a hard
Right.
time translating that with fiction, though. You are given a grander scope of playing. We can play with some stuff. It's just people have to go, all right, this is a faith-based film. This is a fictional story. There has to be a little bit of play that you got to have there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And my experience has been that most people they're cool with that. Like they can
Yeah.
roll with it. There are some people they're not going to.
Yeah.
And that's okay. This movie isn't for them.
Yeah.
And but for those that are willing to take the journey, I think there's a lot there.
Well, you bring up an excellent question then. Who is the shift for? Sometimes
Mhm.
Christian films, they're very targeted. They're very much like, this is the audience. This is for a Christian family. This is for uh there's some film, I'm trying not to name names, but like there's some films like it was marketed for, like, husband and wives who are dealing with some stuff. Then there's some, like, there was one that came out years and years ago. It was used at every church camp to scare kids into heaven. It was Thief in the Night and stuff
Mhm.
like that. and those are more evangelistic. Who is the shift for? What is the purpose of the shift?
So the shift, the funny thing about sci-fi is that it's kind of the domain of the geeks, right? It's our domain. It's where we thrive. It's what we love. I mean, look at behind you.
Right.
But the of the top 10 films of all time, 7 of them are sci-fi.
Mm.
Top 10 grossing films of all time, 7 of them are sci-fi. So those films are not the top 7 in the top 10 because guys like you and me are going, and that's it.
Right.
Those films are that popular because everybody's going to see them. And so I see the shift very much that way. And my experience so far with the test screenings we've done and who is attracted to this film is attracting people who are openly saying, I am not a sci-fi fan. I am very excited about this movie.
Yeah.
There is something in it, in the way that it's presented, because it's not presented as this crazy out there Star Wars-y thing. Although Star Wars is very popular, so maybe that's a bad example. But it's grounded in reality.
Right.
It's fantastical, but it's grounded, and it's grounded most especially in an emotional reality. At least that was the intent. Yeah. And so I think when you're looking at this film, honestly, I think that it is a very appropriate film for families.
Yeah.
It's PG-13. It's got some violence, and it's got some thematic stuff that young kids probably aren't going to want to deal with. But it doesn't have any sex, and it doesn't have any graphic violence, and it doesn't have any language. Yeah. And its themes and what it's getting at, the experience, is universal.
Yeah.
Job is such a great story in the Bible, often overlooked, but it's great because I do believe it is a universal. Yes, nobody's really ever passed through anything like what Job passed through. But as believers, we also pass through trial. Just because we believe doesn't mean everything's great. And that's what Job, to me, is trying to say, is saying that, look, just because you believe, just because you've achieved this faith, doesn't mean that God is done with you. Doesn't mean that the devil's done with you. There is still more to learn, and there's still more growing to do. Right. And there's still more understanding to have. There's still more empathy to achieve. Trial brings empathy. Word. And so that's what the film being about that. And really keying into the idea of also a romance is a pretty big component of this.
Yeah.
Him getting back to his wife, that's not a small thing. And so we're finding that women are excited about this film, men are excited about this film, young men are excited about this film. Everybody is able to come to it, and they're seeing something that they are really intrigued by. And the testing we've done proves that out.
Awesome. Hey, did you like that conversation with Brock, the writer and director of The Shift? Click the link on the screen right now if you guys want to see our conversation go a little bit deeper as we talk about his faith and how it affects his life on a regular basis. Also, don't forget to check the links down below for your information about how to get in touch with Brock, and also how to find this movie at your local theater and how to request it to be shown at your local theater. Until next time, stay devoted. Peace and love.